But it's good to see you today. Let me pray and we'll get going. Father, we just want to stop and say thank you for this day, and thank you for this opportunity. And just a moment ago, acknowledging the fact it's been March was the last time that we were able to meet on a Wednesday morning for this particular Bible study. And so I think we're realizing the blessing that it was. And hopefully, truly, it is the case that absence makes the heart grow fonder, and that we realize that the benefit of being able to get together to study, to be encouraged by you, to be encouraged by each other, and to have your word speak to us. And so as we open your word today, far more than I ever could, I pray that you would be our guide and our teacher. We ask this in Christ's name. Amen. All right, so some of you had asked during this period, hey, are we going to pick up again in Daniel? And the answer was yes. We didn't get very far into it before. Good morning, Donna. And so, but when asked if we're going to pick up, I had to figure out where we were. And so I figured out where we were because I didn't actually have any type notes. I just scribbled some trash on some legal pads and I threw it away when we were done. And so anyway, today what we're going to do is try to make sure that we're all on the same page and just refresh and get back in our minds what's going on. And so some review, and then we're going to plow a little new ground. But open with me, just start back in Daniel chapter 1. And let's get, and we've done this question here a time or 10 before, but it's helpful to keep this stuff in mind. The people of God are known by a title. We call them we call them the Israelites, or the Jews. And for a long time, they're called the Israelites because they make up the nation of Israel. But do they stay one nation forever? No, they become what? They become two. And so they become Israel and Judah. All right, and I've actually cued you as to which one is which. So which one's in the north? Well, the one on top. So Israel's in the north, Judah's in the south. All right. I've told you this before because it really does matter, and I think it helps significantly in trying to make sure that the stuff of the Old Testament makes sense, in the sense that you've got some place hangers to be able to hold some stuff. And there's a couple of big events in Old Testament history and world history that really matter. And so you have Israel that becomes a divided kingdom, so that's Israel in the north and Judah in the south. How many tribes in the north? Remember, so we've got 10 up here. And so that leaves 2. If you'd said 10, that would have been bad. Anyway, so we've got 10 in the north, 2 in the south. And though Judah is a smaller number of tribes, it does have something very special that Israel doesn't have. What does it have in terms of a city? All right, so it's got Jerusalem. Well, that pen is... And I realize that you probably can't see this, but it does help me. So you've got Jerusalem as the capital of Judah in the south. And the people of God at this point, if you could summarize their behavior, what would you say it's like? Thumbs up, thumbs down. Oh, it's thumbs down. In fact, you see this phrase over and over and over again. Everyone did what? What was right in their own eyes. And God was sending messenger after messenger, judge after judge, prophet after prophet to say, you had better wake up. I'm serious about this whole process of you being my people and following me and heeding me. Listen to me or judgment's going to come. And they decided, no, we're going to do things our way. And so judgment came. So who got it first? Do you remember? Israel gets it. And I said in terms of placeholders, this one matters. So 721 BC is when Israel falls. And so that would have been and was an attention getter for Judah, at least for a while. And it's easy for us to look back and wag our fingers at them and say, well, they were so dumb. What was the matter? If that was us, we would never do that, right? But we're dumb too, aren't we? And our lessons are short-lived, and we are very forgetful. We tend to be very obstinate. And so this happens in 721, and finally, later, what happens, and it's at 586. And it may be helpful if you're a Bible writer or in your Bible writer, it may be helpful to put these things to help you as placeholders, so when you're reading about the fall of Israel or the fall of Judah, excuse me, that you have a sense of when these things actually occur. Because when you have those things in place, stuff that we're talking about today, I think is going to make more sense. All right, so with that as backdrop, when you go back to the beginning of Daniel, you read about how it describes in the 3rd year of the reign of King Jehoiakim of Judah, so that's in the south, Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came to Jerusalem and laid siege to it. And he actually lays siege to Jerusalem in 589. So it's 3 years before the kingdom itself fully falls. And if you lay siege to a city, what are you doing? Well, not necessarily. Well, the primary way, like for example, in World War II, there was a big siege that the Germans undertook that didn't work out well for them. You remember what that siege was? Yeah, in Russia, they laid siege against Stalingrad and did so in the heart of the Russian winter and didn't work really well. But if you're going to lay siege to a city, what do you want to do? That's it. You want to cut them off. And so as you cut them off, now today we would also bomb them, but back then you're going to cut everything off. It's likely that you're going to be launching some raids and shooting some stuff and hurling some trash their way, but you're going to do everything you can to make life miserable, because if a siege is successful, what can you avoid? Yeah, a whole lot of bloodshed. So that they just say, this is so awful, we're going to just wave the white flag, and we're going to say we're done. And so Nebuchadnezzar lays siege to Jerusalem in 589. And Jerusalem winds up surrendering, but the kingdom doesn't fall until 3 years later, when Jehoiakim, and we read about this in verse 2, the Lord handed King Jehoiakim of Judah over to him, along with some of the vessels from the house of God. So what happens is, as Jerusalem surrenders, Jehoiakim, he's trying to save face. And it's like, hey, we'll kind of give you the keys to the city. You want some stuff? We've got some gold, and we've got some great antiques, priceless stuff that's in the temple. We'll give that stuff to you. You let me live. You let some of our people live. And so anything that's of value in the city of Jerusalem is effectively taken. And the city in the southern kingdom is going to fall completely 3 years later. But not only are the goodies taken, but so too are some of the people that are taken. And so in verse 3, you see that the king ordered his chief eunuch to bring some of the Israelites from the royal family and from the nobility, young men without any physical defect, good-looking, suitable for instruction, all wisdom. Anyway, he's saying, guys, I want you to pick some of the cream of the crop of Judean culture, or the culture of the people in Judah, and I have use for them. And so we're going to put them into this Babylonian training program, and we're going to make something out of them. These are people that could be really useful for us. And so you've got a whole stack of young, handsome, bright, gifted men that get carted off to the Babylonian capital, and we've got Babylon, Babylon, is led by, I will just abbreviate because I can never spell it right, Nebuchadnezzar, all right? So these are carted off, and the plan is that they're going to be serving under Nebuchadnezzar. Now, by the time you get to verse 6, we're told of the Judahites that there are 4 specifically that are of consequence to us. One of them is a guy whose name is Daniel, and another one is, no, not yet. Yeah, you get Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And so once they get brought in, I mean, this is a great way to break people. And you'd say, well, no, you're not Mike, you are flower arrangement. I mean, so that you're that part of breaking people, you want their identity to be no longer that of Judah. You want them to be their identity, how they view everything about themselves, to be connected with Babylon. So we're going to give them Babylonian names. And so they become Daniel, so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. What's interesting, these are all Babylonian names. Daniel, does he get a Babylonian name? Yeah, he does. You see it in verse 6. What does he become? He becomes Belteshazzar. But it's interesting. We call these three by their Babylonian names, but we call Daniel by his Hebrew name. Anyway, so we always think of this foursome, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Why? I don't know. There's probably a reason somewhere. But they are in this training program in Babylon. And in the scheme of things, there are some real perks that come with this. Do you remember what one of the biggest perks was? Yeah, so they get really good food, and so they're not taken to the gas station and where they've got to get one of those burritos that's rolling on the warmer. They get the stuff that the king is eating, and so this would have been rich. This is not choice meat or chuck. I mean, this is USDA prime. I mean, they're getting the best of the food that the Babylonians have to offer. But Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. In fact, but Daniel specifically describes how, in verse 8, that he didn't want to defile himself with the king's food. And we talked about this before, and though the text doesn't tell us, there's an implication there. What's the implication? Do what? No. Well, because it says, or with the wine he. No, I don't think it's. I don't think that it's alcohol. I don't believe that's the problem. So if you're going to defile yourself with this food and drink, that says, well, it's like that it's not kosher. That there is, well, not specifically that it's not kosher even, but that could be part of it. But what else? That's what I believe, that this had been offered and effectively dedicated to Babylonian gods and deities. And so I don't think that it was like, I don't know, what's something that we don't want to eat? I know we don't want to eat horse, right? Oh, I'm not going to defile myself. I don't believe that it was like, oh, that's so out of the norm of my diet. I believe the ultimate problem was that this was a defilement, a spiritual defilement. So I think that whatever was going on with this food and drink had less to do with what it actually was and more to do with what had gone on with it. And I believe it's likely that it had been effectively dedicated, not sacrificed, but set apart, consecrated to these pagan Babylonian gods. And Daniel's like, I don't want any part of this. And so their handler, the chief aide of the king, is approached by Daniel, and Daniel says, listen, I really don't want to have to defile myself with this. Is it possible that I cannot have any of that stuff and just have, you see in verse 12, just vegetables and water to drink? Can we just have some of this? Like, there's some tomatoes out in the garden. I think I saw a cantaloupe, and there's a radish. Can we just have that stuff and water? And so the implication is that whatever this stuff is, this is not the type of stuff, this is not the stuff that is part of the king's diet, which suggests that it's likely it was just the stuff that was out there, that nothing had been done with it with respect to any pagan offering. And so, do you remember what the king's aide says? Yeah, because he's like, I'm afraid to say yes. I mean, in the end, I don't really care what you eat, but if you guys look gaunt and just like you're wasting away with bad color, I mean, you are my responsibility. And so if I'm failing in my responsibility, the king's going to hold me to it, and it may be my head. So I don't know about this. And so Daniel says, listen, what if we do it for how long? So 10 days. Let's do this for 10 days. And if we look okay, fine. We keep doing that. But if we look terrible, then we'll eat whatever we have to eat. So he's like, okay. So after 10 days, how do they look? They look better than the other guys. And why do you think that is? Because they're sitting over there eating funnel cake, and they're getting fat and happy. And so the rest of these guys from Judah, at this point, because Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego look so much better, so much healthier, they're eating a more nutritious diet, less fatty stuff. Probably their skin looks, everything looks better about them. And so what does the chief eunuch order? That everybody has to eat this. And so that probably didn't curry a whole lot of favor between these four and the rest of the guys from Judah. I mean, if you were there, you'd probably like, what is the matter with you? As that donut is yanked from your hand and the bowl of ice cream is yanked from you, you're like, what? I don't want this squash. I want cookies and cream. Anyway, so that's going on. And we're told also that God blessed these four in particular with unusual gifts or dispensations of wisdom, and Daniel specifically is gifted with the ability and this divinely given gift of understanding and being able to interpret dreams and visions. So as chapter 2 begins, Nebuchadnezzar is having some sleepless nights. He's having some real difficulty. And he is having this recurring dream. And he wakes up, maybe in the morning, maybe he wakes up in the middle of the night with it. And the context seems to suggest that this is recurring because it is so notable to him. It is distressing to him. And when that happens, he believes that this might mean something. Now, sometimes, I don't know, do you have crazy dreams? I mean, sometimes just absolute nonsense. But do you ever have a dream that you're like, I wonder if that means anything? I mean, because sometimes the dream could be, I was cutting the grass and all of a sudden, I got off the mower and then a monkey started driving it. And then, a zebra came by and picked him up in a convertible and they went to Yum Yums. I mean, sometimes our dreams are that crazy. And if we have those, we think, well, that's just kind of nonsense. That's my mind kind of unpacking. But sometimes, and in truth, at the moment, I can't think of anything in particular, but it's possible that you have had a dream before that you thought, I wonder if there's something to that. Nebuchadnezzar's dream, he believes there's something to this. And so he gathers all the counselors, all the wise men, in addition, all the mediums, the sorcerers, anybody that's a spiritist in the Babylonian Empire, because this is a culture that's steeped in idolatrous spirituality. And so the God of the Hebrews, the real God that exists, their hearts are not towards him, they don't follow him, but they are engaging in all sorts of dark, effectively demonic, spiritual realm. That's where they're operating. So the king summons all these guys together and says, hey, I've got a problem, I've got a dream, I believe that it means something, I need you to tell me what it means. And so their response was what? Well, they said, okay, no biggie. I mean, this is in our wheelhouse. This is what we do. You just tell us what the dream was, and then we'll tell you what it meant. That's pretty reasonable, right? So if I told you, listen, I've had a dream and I wonder what it means, you would say, well, what was the dream? Well, when they tell that to the king, what does he say? Yeah, I'm not going to tell you at all. In fact, and it's really smart of the king because, in truth, I mean, you think about some of these palm readers and Sister or Madame Margot across the railroad tracks that down near D.H. Griffin, where their spiritual advisor, you could go in there and let her look at your palm and she's going to tell you all sorts of stuff that may sound somewhat credible that is absolute nonsense, right? According to this, you have not washed your hands, and according to this one, anyway, all kinds of stuff that would sound very credible. But in this case, he's not going to permit them to say something that can't be true. And the only way that they could tell him something that he knows to be true, that they actually know of what they speak, is if without any provocation, without any additional information, they tell him what the dream was. And so if they can produce that, then it's likely they can tell him what it means. And so what's their response? What do they say? That you are asking us the impossible. I mean, it would be saying, Michael, I need you to lift this building. I can't do that. I mean, what you have tasked us with, no person is capable of doing. If you will just tell us what the dream is, I promise you, we'll tell you what it means. But we can't tell you just what crossed through your minds. That's impossible. And so what does the king say? Yeah, I'll kill all of you. Signs the order that every one of them, and that would include anybody that's in that group, including these 4 guys, because these are counselors to the king as well. They're going to be executed as well. So when word of this edict, and my guess is that it had a date on it when all this was going to happen, where they were all going to be rounded up and executed, Daniel goes to the king and says, can you give me just a bit of time, and I'll tell you the answers that you're looking for. And so around verse 16, it says, Daniel went and asked the king to give him some time so that he could give the king the interpretation. Apparently the king says, okay, I'll give you a little bit of time. And so at that point, verse 17, this is about where we were ending before. Daniel goes back to his home, and he gets together with these 3, and what do? Yeah, they pray, and they are appealing to God. This is our circumstance. This is the situation that we've been handed. We're leaning on you. We're trusting in you. Daniel needs to know what this was and what it means. All right, so at that point, you skip down to verse 24. It says that Daniel goes to Arioch, whom the king had assigned to destroy the wise men. So here's the guy that's going to be the chief executioner. And he says, listen, don't destroy these people. Bring me before the king, and I'll tell him the answer. I've got the answer. And so very quickly he is brought, and it's announced to the king in verse 25, I have found a man among the Judean exiles who can let the king know the interpretation. And look at the question in verse 26. The king says to Daniel, are you able to tell me the dream I had and its interpretation? But look at Daniel's response. He says, no wise man, medium, magician, diviner is able to make known to the king the mystery he is asked about. In essence, he is saying to the king exactly what these other guys have said. There's nobody, there's no person that can do this. But, he says in verse 28, there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. So he's saying, listen, and this comes as a preface to everything that follows. And so it's really important that Daniel is, out of the gate, he's directing attention to God. He's not saying, boy, I've been studying, I've been working at this for a while, and I've got all of these stripes on my shoulders where I have been to all these classes, and I have studied, and I have read, and I've figured out a whole lot of stuff. He's not doing anything other than saying, this is all about God. This is his ability. And so he's trying to direct his attention away from these dark spiritual forces that the rest of these mediums have been working in, and trying to direct his attention to the one true and real God. All right, so at that point, he, starting in verse 31, tells him the dream. So we're chapter 2, verse 31. He says, Your Majesty, as you were watching, suddenly a colossal statue appeared. The statue, tall and dazzling, was standing in front of you, and its appearance was terrifying. The head of the statue was pure gold. Its chest and arms were silver. Its stomach and thighs were bronze. Its legs were iron. Its feet were partly iron and partly fired clay. As you were watching, a stone broke off without a hand touching it, struck the statue on its feet of iron and fired clay and crushed them. Then the iron, the fired clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were shattered and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away, and not a trace of them could be found. All right, so that's the dream. So let's think through this for a second. I must also tell you that this marker board is a dream. I have dreamt of this board for many moons. And so now it can go where I go. Yes. All right, so we've got a statue. Not only do I have poor penmanship, I have poor artistic ability. So here we go. All right, so let's draw us a statue. So here's part one of the statue. Oh, let's make it. All right, so we got a head on this statue. And the head is what? All right, so it's gold. All right, so we've got a neck. We got shoulders. I'm saying this because I'm thinking about what. All right, so we've got arms. Let's give them short sleeves. All right, so the text says that the statue or head was pure gold. Its chest and arms are what? All right, so we got this chest and arms are silver. I don't know about you. That looks like a statue to me. Anyway. All right, so this is silver. And so it says stomach and thighs. So this area here is what? Bronze. And then you have legs. And what are they? Not yet. They're iron. And then we got feet. And so they are a hot mess. So you've got, oh, this is just ghastly. Let's put a little bit of clay in here. All right, so we've got iron and clay feet. All right, so we have a statue, and in the dream, that you got this big, massive thing, and it doesn't. No, it doesn't look happy. It looks, because it scares the king. So it looks. Well, that's not good either. Let's make it angry. There. That's more terrifying, isn't it? My handwriting is, that's just pitiful. I'm sorry. Anyway, it's terrifying. He sees this, but that's not the end of the story. What else happens with the statue? So there's a rock that comes from somewhere. So you got a rock. And what does the rock do? It hits, what does it hit? It hits the feet. And what happens? Yeah, so it's kind of like Jenga, and if you get or anything, you mess up the foundation, everything falls. And so iron, bronze, silver, gold. All right, if you just stop there, there's a couple of things that we ought to pay attention to. All right, what are some things that stand out to you about that? I said again. All right, so the weight is at the top. I don't know. You got because the head is smaller than these legs, and you got all that iron there. So there's a whole lot of iron. Yes, sir. Yeah, so it's kind of like the Olympics, isn't it? So we've got gold, silver, bronze, iron. That's what they ought to do in the Olympics. We ought to do a fourth place and give people, you win a horseshoe. But it goes, there's this decreasing line, so that gold is worth a lot more than iron. Bronze is certainly worth a lot more than iron and clay. And think about that. Iron and clay, how well is that going to mix together? It's not. I mean, it's just not. You can't, I mean, they may be, you may put them in a form, but clay does not meld with iron. It can be interspersed, but that is a hot mess, isn't it? All right, so we've got That's a big thing that you should notice, but there's also something else I think you should pay attention, though, too. In particular, is the fact that there's going to be, and to me, I think this matters, that there's two legs. I realize there's two arms, but I think it's going to matter more when this starts to unfold. So the king hears this, and what do you think he's thinking so far? I mean, this is a Gomer Pyle moment, right? It's Shazam. It's golly. I mean, he is shocked, probably, that what Daniel said is what? That's exactly what he was dreaming. And so if he hears that, what's his next thought? What does it mean? And the guy that has just told me this, he can also tell me what this means. So, verse 36, he says, "This was the dream. Now we will tell the king its interpretation. Your Majesty," verse 37, he says, "you are King of kings. The God of heavens has given you sovereignty, power, strength, and glory. Wherever people live, or wild animals, or birds of the sky, he's handed them over to you and made you ruler of them all. You are the head of gold." All right. So he's done something important, a couple of things that are important. So he's saying that this is Nebuchadnezzar. But Nebuchadnezzar, what's his nationality? All right, so this is Babylonian Empire, which at this point is headed by Nebuchadnezzar. Now, does it give you pause at all when he says, "You are King of kings"? Because when we hear that phrase in the Bible, what do we tend to think of? Yeah, that's language that should be ascribed to God, that he is King of kings and Lord of lords. But when he says that you're King of kings, he's not trying to describe or ascribe to Nebuchadnezzar that he is God, and to take godly characteristics or the characteristics that are the sole descriptives of God and assign them to a person. He's not trying to do that, but I believe that he is describing the significance of his influence at this point, that you are the head honcho. You really are. And your empire is up here. All right, so it's also important to notice he says this: "The God of heavens has given you sovereignty, power, strength, and glory." Now, so when he just said, "You're King of kings," but what? Yes, the only reason that you are in this position is because there's one that's greater than you. And it's the one I just told you about to begin with, that told me what the dream is, that's making this interpretation known. He's the one that's ultimately in charge. He's given you this power. And it says he has, at the end of verse 33, he has handed them over to you and made you ruler over them all. You're the head of gold. So when Nebuchadnezzar hears this, what do you think he's thinking? Do you like that? Anyway. Verse 39, "After you there will arise another kingdom." So even though he says this is this is Nebuchadnezzar, suggests this is a kingdom. It exists for more than just one person. All right, so the Babylonian Empire is going to be hanging around. Let me get my dates right. It goes from 605 to 539 BC. You probably can't read that, but 605 to 539 BC. Then he says, verse 39, "After you there will rise another kingdom inferior to yours, and then another, a third kingdom of bronze, which will rule over the earth. A fourth kingdom will be as strong as you, as iron." After the Babylonian Empire, the next big one was, starting in 539, so 539 to 331 BC. This is the Medo-Persian Empire. And this, 539 to 331. 539 to 331. And it's the Medo-Persians. Their primary leader The one that the standout king during that reign is Cyrus the Great. We're going to read about him in chapter 7 and 8, so that's going to come a little bit later. And so for 208 years, this is the dominant world power. So the Babylonians are gone. We've gone to the kingdom of the Medes and the Persians. That's silver. We're going to bronze now. So bronze, what do you, I want, no need in guessing. Bronze is going to be the Greece, or Grecian Empire. And so that's going to be from 331 to 146. And I don't know if you remember from history class many moons ago, but there was a really big Greek king, ruler, that he's kind of synonymous with the Grecian Empire. I think you might have said it. Say it again. Yes, you got the A. Yeah, it was a group effort. So Alexander the Great, which honestly, if you're going to be a king, give yourself a title like that. I'm just not Michael. I am Michael the Great, right? So Alexander the Great, that takes you to 146 BC. And just, you know this, but just remember it. Obviously, BC, we're working towards zero, right? So that gets us to 146. That gets us to bronze, and then we go to iron. What do you think iron's going to be? This one's a pretty good one. All right, so we got the Romans. So that's going to take you from 146, and in various forms, it's going to take you all the way to 1453 AD. That's a long time, isn't it? So 146 years before zero, and then another 1,453 years that it's going to exist. Now, there's a whole lot of heads that we know of those, right? What are some Roman heads of state that we're familiar with? How many Caesars were there? Well, they were all Caesars. So you had Caesar Augustus. Shakespeare wrote about one of them. Well, Julius Caesar, right? Caesar salad. Caesar dressing. Little Caesars. Charlemagne is going to come. He is, when was Charlemagne? Charlemagne was, Edict of Milan was 313. That's Constantine. And so, anyway, Roman Empire, there's all of those years. Obviously, there's more than one just stand out. And there's a whole stack of Roman emperors. Well, in fact, one that you're out of the gate you become very familiar with. In Luke chapter 2, in the days of who? Caesar Augustus, all right? So you have iron, and look what it says of iron. Iron crushes and shatters everything. Iron's harder than gold, right? Harder than bronze. Like if you're going to go plow, you don't want, where is the gold tiller, right? You want something, you want hard. And the Roman Empire, in fact, of all those that we're going to look at, it was the one that possessed such massive strength and grew to be so expansive and just massive and had such oppressively strong armies and a profound, significant military might. All right, I noted a while ago there's two legs. What happens by the time you get to 285 AD, the Roman Emperor Diocletian decides, you know what, this empire is just too big. And it's so big that we can't effectively manage it. We need to divide this. And so the Roman Empire in 285 becomes divided. It gets reunified. It gets split into three. But then by 395, it splits into two for good. And we know them by what titles? Do you remember? Well, we know them by geographic titles. There's the Eastern and Western. Eastern, Western. All right, so Eastern, so we get on the same side. So Eastern is going to be on, all right, so the Do what? Yeah, so, but Western is going to be ruled where? So that's on the, so in terms of the empire, it's going to be further this way. What do you think the capital of the Western Empire is going to be? Yeah, it's the city of Rome. And so Rome is going to be the headquarters of the Western Empire. Eastern is going to be, well, it would be Constantinople, which we know today as Istanbul. So that's in what country? Turkey. And so, and I just mentioned a moment ago, Constantine shows up, around 300. The biggest thing that he does is to issue what's known as the Edict of Milan in 313 AD, which makes Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire. But all of those things happen between 146 BC and 1453 AD. I think it's notable that there's two legs because you do have two halves of this Roman Empire. Afterwards, there is you have these iron and clay feet. He says the toes, you saw the iron mixed with clay, and the toes of the feet were partly iron and partly fired clay. Part of the kingdom will be strong, part will be brittle. And the peoples will mix with one another, but will not hold together, just as iron does not mix with fired clay. After the Romans, you do not, in fact, actually after the Western Empire falls, that sends Europe into what's known as the Dark Ages for 500 years. But after the fall of the Roman Empire, there is not truly a significantly great world-dominating empire. What has been experienced since that time are some nations that are stronger than others. That when we think about American military might and economic strength, but the truth is we're still pretty young. We're particularly young, especially compared to something that lasts this long, right? So what you have here, I believe, represented are a whole series historically of peoples and nations that some were stronger, some were weaker, but there is no worldwide unifying, bringing it all together, putting the total package together like you see from here. Also, as we noted earlier, that you go from, in fact, you see back in verse 39, he says, after you there will rise another kingdom inferior to yours. The language that she used is describing a downward flow. Now, it does not suggest that these become weaker necessarily, because in truth, the Roman Empire, physically, militarily, economically, is much stronger than the Babylonians. It's a lot bigger. They got more stuff. They got more soldiers. They got better weaponry. They got metals that didn't exist back in here. I mean, they've refined the art of warfare to the degree that the Babylonians could have never imagined. But what I believe is going on is what is best described by John Calvin. He's saying that what you're seeing is not a degradation in power or strength. What you're seeing is a degradation in the sense that you have an increase in the moral vices of people. That morally, spiritually, there is a decline as history continues to unfold. All right? There's not time to, well, in fact, this kind of stops here, effectively, except that Nebuchadnezzar, in verse 46, Nebuchadnezzar fell face down, worshiped Daniel, gave orders to present an offering and incense to him, and he says, your God is indeed God of gods, Lord of lords, Lord of kings and revealer of mysteries, since you're able to reveal this mystery. And so he not only rewards Daniel, but he praises God, the one who made all of this known. And I think all Nebuchadnezzar can think is, hey, I got the gold. I'm the gold guy. I'm the head, right? But back to this statue, if all of these things represent world-dominating powers or worldwide forces, you have down here at the feet this conflagration of materials that don't blend together, and finally there is a rock that comes in and smashes the feet. And when the feet are smashed, this whole statue falls. In short, what does this statue, again, you got all these individual pieces, but what does this one singular statue represent? Well, the world and the power and the powers of the world. and that one day, what's going to happen? All of the greatness, all of the power of the world eventually is going to be brought down. Now, thankfully, we know the rest of the story. Not just about Daniel, but we know the rest of the story of what God has said and shown us in His Word that's going to happen as time begins to unfold. Now, we'll spend some more time looking at this a little bit later, but today was kind of review and explanation. And I can't give you a ton of application today because we're setting up. We're setting up. Any brief questions about that? Yes, ma'am. No, no, no. The city falls before the kingdom does. And so they lay siege to Jerusalem. Let me see. What did I tell you? I can't remember. Did I say 589 is when the siege of Jerusalem should begin? That's what I just said. 589 is when the siege of Jerusalem would begin. Correct. 586 is when Judah, the kingdom, falls. We're thinking backwards. Yeah, so we're BC. We're BC. We're on what I like to call Nikki time. So if she's watching this, that's my gift to you, Nikki. Again, forgive my. I don't want to be rude, but I can't hang out because I got to go to the doctor. Let me pray for us and look forward to seeing you next week. Father, thank you for giving us this account in your word that, among other things, shows us not only what has happened, but it's giving us a glimpse of what will happen. And if there's anything that is a glaring takeaway, it is this, that you ultimately are the one that is in charge, and that the strongest, the mightiest nations that have ever existed ultimately will be brought down, because ultimately, one day, every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. I pray that we might live our life today understanding that you're not just in control and ruler then, you're ruler right now. And we want you to guide our lives, and we live in such a way that we're following your lead. We say this to you in Jesus' name. Amen. God bless you.